It's our pleasure to welcome a good friend, the Reverend Robert Lee IV, or as I refer to him as Rob. Rob is an extraordinary individual, a leader, courageous and thoughtful. He attended Duke University Divinity School. He has a master's in theological studies. And he came to national prominence after Charlottesville. And he raised his voice against those who preached hate, who marched in the streets. And because he is a collateral descendant of the Confederate leader Robert E. Lee, he is named for him, that brought him into the notice of the media. He found himself thrust on the MTV Awards a few days later, and the rest, Rob, is history. You have become a powerful voice, and your voice is heard on NPR, on CNN, on your podcast, Beloved Journal, and you have made that voice heard. Deeply religious, deeply thoughtful, deeply caring. Over the years, you have written a variety of books: Stained Glass Millennials, A Sin by Any Other Name, The Pulpit and the Paper, and Fostering Hope. It's been our pleasure to welcome your family, welcome your wife, Stephanie, to Anshe Emet. And we follow the progress of Athene and Phoenix regularly on Facebook, along with your poodle Frank and golden doodle Maggie. And something else you should know about Rob is he's an avid autograph collector. So what is your most prized autograph?
I have a Coretta Scott King signed book that was a gift from someone very special to me, and that's probably one that's pretty high up there on the list right now. But it changes.
I should mention that at my 40th anniversary here at Anshe Emet, Rob and Stephanie were thoughtful enough to give me a book that was signed by Abraham Joshua Heschel. And that meant a lot.
Well, you know, I do, before we get into what we got to say, I feel like Pastor Harris and I at least need like an SNL jacket at this point by the time that we've all, an Anshe Emet jacket. We've appeared here. Between Pastor Chris Harris and I think we've got it on lock about pastors who appear at synagogues.
I think that's true. I think it's true.
Let's get on that for next time. So
I'd like to think of that as a badge of honor.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Today we're going to talk about the character of Joseph, but it's a conversation that will lead us into a hard conversation about what does it mean to be a Jew in the diaspora and about anti-Semitism in this country. So, Rob, before we move into that, how do you understand Joseph's character? When you think about the biblical Joseph, what goes through your mind?
I love Joseph. St. John Chrysostom, who is a saint in my tradition, talks about how Joseph kind of gave the archetype by which we could see the rest of Scripture. Something befell him and by which God could bring God's providence to God's people. And I really like that as an opportunity to understand what's going on. But the point about Joseph that I love the most comes not in this portion of text, but later when Joseph says, "What you intended for evil, God intended for good." And if that's not a word that we need to hear right now, I don't know what is. What you intended for evil, what people in this world intend for evil, God can shift and make and morph into some sense of good. And it may not make sense right now. I'm not one to wax poetically about why things happen to good people, but I'm confident through it all that there's a through line. I saw on Facebook has that wonderful memories option. For some of us it's good, and for some of us it's not so good. You see memories maybe you don't want to see, but one of the memories I saw is this week, 6 years ago, I bought my house that my wife and I live in, and we have since adopted our 2 daughters into. But at that time, it was not a good situation. I had just lost my job. I had just come to Anshe Emet for the first time. Those two were not exactly coordinated, but all that's to say, though, is it became something of a, now it's good. Now it became something good. And so what was intended for harm, what was intended for evil, God has since intended for good. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
What Rob isn't mentioning is that after his appearance on MTV and when he became vocal against hate and racism, he lost his first job. So you were brave, and you, like Joseph, took a stand. Now, the reason that I think that Joseph is an important character to think about diaspora Jewry is because he is the first Ish Galut. He's the first Jew who lives in the diaspora. He's living in Egypt. Now, he's carried there, but that's where he's living. And he has this amazing Horatio Alger story. Like one day, as we learned in our portion, he's in a dungeon, and the next day, he's standing before Pharaoh, and the next day, he's the Grand Vizier of Egypt. And the Torah is very specific about the deal that he makes. His name is changed. His clothing changes. He's given a wife who happens to be the daughter of one of the Egyptian priests, and he is remarkably successful. This is a story that Jews know. This is a story from the diaspora. You think about the Middle Ages, a country like Poland, who, after the Crusades and Jews were fleeing from Western Europe, invited Jews into the country because the king felt that the Jews could make a difference, improve their lives, and they did. Same thing happened in the Ottoman Empire after the expulsion from Jews in 1492. This is a story, the story of Joseph is one that we tell, or that Jewish history tells in a very profound and powerful way. But then comes, and as the book of Genesis is going to close, the Jewish people, the descendants of Jacob, they're all living in a very good place in Goshen. Life is good. We open the book of Exodus, and the next thing that we read is that there was a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. And then the words become more ominous. The Torah says, a new king arose over Egypt who didn't know Joseph, and he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. One wonders the percentage they actually made of the Egyptian population, but if you study the Holocaust, you might take note of the fact that Jews were 2% of the German population in the 1930s. But they appear much larger. So Pharaoh continues, he says, let us deal shrewdly with them so they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in a fight against us and rise up from the ground. And thus begins that period of slavery. Anti-Semitism is an old story for Jews living in the diaspora. So I'm wondering how you react to that reading.
I had a pastor friend who had multiple associates, and he said when he was leaving, a new Pharaoh was coming into town. And that was kind of the joke. But it's not really a joke, right? Like we have this this real sense of urgency in the text if you read it. There's something happening here that's changing, and it's changing on a grand scale. But I think Scripture, it builds upon itself, for me at least, as someone who reads Scripture, it builds upon itself. And the thing that I would hope that we could take from that is not that a new Pharaoh arose, because new Pharaohs are going to arise all the time. But what we can take from that is that Joseph was able to dream in captivity. Joseph was able to dream in diaspora. There's a dream there. There's interpreting dreams. There's understanding that things are afoot that we may not always understand, but God is up to something there. And we just have to pay attention. And if we pay enough attention, if we do our part, if we, both Jews and Christians and Muslims of goodwill everywhere, stand up against anti-Semitism everywhere, then it's mutually beneficial for all of us, but it's also the right thing to do. It's the necessary thing to do. I look at it this way. Asher, it's so great that I love sitting up front in church or in synagogue because I get to see what's going on. Asher, you did so well, and your younger siblings were doing great, and they were trying so hard. And you see your younger sibling, and you just want them to do as well as you're doing. At least that's what a good relationship should look like. And that's what I think in these Abrahamic faiths, we've got to have each other's backs. And when Christians see anti-Semitism, and I know there's some people of different faith traditions in here today celebrating your bar mitzvah, when we see that, we have to say unequivocally no, that enough is enough, that we've seen what we've seen, and we've seen where this goes. This is a tale, as you said, as old as time. We've got to do something about it.
I love the idea of a dream. And, here in this sanctuary, in that back wall, you have Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, the New York Harbor, and the history of that window is that it was put in 1941 after the old windows, creation scene, were shattered. That was a way of saying, we Jews, we're part of this American dream. And yet, it feels like the world has shifted since October 7th. That we're hearing things that none of us could have ever believed possible. All of that sort of belonged to the Holocaust.
Right.
That belongs somewhere else, not in America.
Right.
But to see the kind of the change that's sort of exemplified in the book of Exodus. Right. A new Pharaoh rose, and like Joseph dies, a new Pharaoh rose that doesn't have any memory or doesn't want to have any memory of Joseph, and suddenly, in an instant, the world changes. That's how I think a lot of Jews feel. I can speak for myself. This is a time that is so unfamiliar to me, I can't tie it to anything else in my American experience, in my world experience. I'm hearing things that I can't make sense of. I can't imagine that the three of the presidents of three of the most prestigious universities in the world could not direct a statement about genocide without contextualizing it on their campuses. When you heard that, what were you thinking?
Well, I think that academics, first of all, unequivocally, what they said was just wrong. Shouldn't have said it the way they said it. Genocide in any form of threats of genocide is evil, deplorable, and should be dealt with. I think not to defend, yeah. And I'm not going to defend it. I will say that academics, and I just finished my doctorate on December 1st, so I dealt with a lot of them.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
I dealt with a lot of academics. They have this tendency to be thinking in their own heads, and I think that's what was happening. But again, it's unequivocally wrong, and we can't parcel it out at that point. I mean, and the flip side of that, too, is I think it's important for all of us here in the United States to remember the complexities of the geopolitical status of the Arab region and the Jewish state. It's a very complex reality. I want to be clear that there are good Palestinian people, and I know that you
Absolutely.
know that.
Of course that's true.
And I think we're so at each other's throats. The polarization is so incredible. The temperature is so high that we're forgetting each other in this. I mean, someone I studied for a very long time, Dr. King, talked about the beloved community. And I'm not talking about Hamas. I'm talking about the Palestinians. There are good people there. There are good people in Israel. What we've got to do is figure out a way in which we can recognize each other's goodness, the righteousness in those people that mean well, the people of goodwill everywhere. And that's hard work. And the reason we haven't done it is because it's hard work, as the United States more broadly. And so what we've got to do is be careful in our language that we're not condemning the entire region or people. And in the same way, we have to stand up, both as Jews and Christians, and say, look, enough is enough in how we talk about these things. It goes on so many angles, right?
I can't agree with you more, but at the same time, when you are watching marches not taking place in the Middle East, but in Chicago.
Right.
Where people are saying, by any means necessary, as if to say what happened on October 7th is somehow understandable in some geopolitical way. When people are unwilling to call out evil and instead look at situations, look at the world through a lens of power and powerlessness,
Right.
To me, that is a chilling moment for any religious person. And I'm wondering how you as a Christian, as a thoughtful, believing Christian minister, thinks about that when you hear that.
I think that sometimes we in the United States are very comfortable, especially in this generation, my generation. We've not had to deal with the memory, the recent memory of the Holocaust. We've not had to deal with the recent memory of segregation or of Jim Crow. People younger than me, we've got to make sure that they know our history. And I'm not saying, we've got to make sure that they know the correct history too, because it's very, it's very easy to say, well, this is the history and this is how it goes, and it tells you that, slavery was good or it had benefits. We've got to have a right telling of history in order to correct this ship of state, because it's not just a problem from protesters on the street, it's a problem for people running for office right now who are saying that either all Jews are lumping them into one category or lumping other people into one category. It's the polarization, and it is dangerous. We have got to emphatically condemn what is happening right now towards our Jewish siblings as Christians. But not only that, we have to show up too. Like, I wish that there were more, I love that there's some people here today that are Christian, they came up and talked to me before the service. That was great. They were kind of surprised to see a pastor here, which is cool. Regularly scheduled programming will be back on next week. But all that's to say is that we've got to show up. I love that Pastor Harris wrote a letter to your congregation. I wanted to be here sooner, but scheduling just didn't permit it. But all that's to say is you all as Jews need to know that you have people who care about you, who care about your well-being, and who care about your future, not only here, but across the world. And you need to feel that deep within your soul. I want to let that sit there for a second, because it is so important to know that you are seen and you are heard. Because the worst feeling in the world is to not be seen and to not be heard. I can't promise you what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't deal in that. But I do know a God who is working already there, and is working behind and before and in front and beside. And that God is a God that both Christians and Jews serve, and one that I celebrate, that has brought me friendships with people like you and countless others who I send Christmas cards to. Thank you for bearing with me. But that's the point, right? We bear each other's burdens. We sit there. We sit with your pain. But we also show up So if there's people watching this on the live stream or there's people in the room who are not of Jewish faith or tradition, I encourage you to find ways to plug in. We need more of that right now.
Your words are like a balm in a way. I can say for myself, and I know I speak for many here, that this has been a really lonely time for the Jewish community. I know that clergy that I've walked with in the Muslim community or in the Christian community, I haven't heard from. So when you reach out, it makes a difference. In the story of Joseph, Joseph never forgot about God. In his loneliness, he understood that he had to be part of that plan. Our traditions have a vision of what the world can be. Before we began to speak today, we sang a prayer that we sing at every service, even though there hasn't been one day in human history when there has been peace. We continue to pray for peace.
And long for it, too.
And long for it, but have to work for it. Mm-hmm. I think the people of Israel want peace. I know that if Hamas were to lay down its arms, if that there would be peace. We're also dealing with an ideology that does not have a place not only in Israel for Jews, but puts Jews in danger in this world. So good and evil are very real, and how we embrace that mission to walk with God, but to call out good, but to also call out evil. And that applies, by the way, when we see wrongdoing in the Jewish community. This isn't about us and them. It's a larger picture. But we have to, as you said, have the courage of our convictions. We have to make our voices heard. So, this is very unlike me, but I'm going to give you the last word.
Oh, gosh. That is a big deal. So I think I'll actually let my daughters have the last word. Athena and Phoenix, so many of you who again received the Christmas cards have seen them. They're amazing, precocious, incredible girls who my wife Stephanie and I adopted 2.5 years ago. Towards around this time 2.5 years ago, or 2 years ago, I was coming up to actually speak at Anshe Emet. And my oldest daughter, Athena, heard that I was going to speak at a synagogue. She had, again, very little conception of what a synagogue is, so we talked about it. And she decided that she was going to give Rabbi Siegel a Christmas present. Okay. I don't know how that's going to go down. We'll see. I mean, he's a very, he's a very, he'll accept it, but I don't know, Athena. And I remember she made this beautiful ornament with her sister Phoenix that we brought up and gave to you. And I actually have your present in my backpack. It's a copy of this year's present. It's just hot off the press. It's a book that they love to read at night that we hope you might enjoy as well. It's called The Dark by Lemony Snicket. It's a children's book, so it'll be a quick read for you. The book it talks about this boy named Laszlo, and Laszlo is this boy who is afraid of the dark. He doesn't know how to fight the dark because the dark seems so big and so strong and so powerful in this moment that he's scared. He's scared out of his mind. Then all of a sudden, out of the dark, he hears a voice calling to him. The voice says, "Come here, I've got to show you something. Come here, I've got to show you something." Laszlo goes down the stairs of his house and goes through the living room, and it's really, really dark there too. And he goes down into the basement, and he sees from the cabinet there's something calling to him. It's a light bulb. Laszlo grabs the light bulb and goes back up into his room and plugs it into his little nightlight. And here's the line that I think is important for you and for all of us to remember. It said, the dark kept on being dark but it never bothered Laszlo again. We live in a world that is crying out for light and goodness and righteousness. And this community, you all who have become like family to me, you all who I look up to, you all who are my friends and reach out all the time over silly things from the Eagles to other sports related things. It's what we do. It's what community does. And if you need any more example of this, I promise I'm going to stop. I'm not going to preach too long. You can see it down here again when Cantor Brook and family from around came up as Asher's siblings were getting a little restless and offered them solace and comfort and said, "It's going to be over soon." That's what community does. The light's going to keep being, the dark's going to keep being dark. But we long for that day when it will not bother us again.
Pastor Lee, thank you for bringing a little bit of light at a dark time. It was a belated candle on Hanukkah or a early Christmas present to our community, but we thank you for being with us today.